So welcome again to kind of the second part of our debriefing webinars. And I am Christine Kelly. I'm the Atlas Literacy Coordinator, and I'm going to have Lindsay and Brandy come on and briefly introduce themselves.
I'll go first. So my name is Brandy Logan. I am the high school equivalency and adult education accountability specialist here at the Department of Ed, and working with Lindsay and Christine and developing all the information for our new HiSET.
And I'm Lindsay Poost, and I am the Numeracy and Special Projects Coordinator with Atlas. And sorry for the delay, I was turning off lullaby music, so you didn't have to hear that.
Thank you, Lindsay and Brandy. And yep, we have been working together, talking together, and kind of dipping our toes in just like everyone else. So if you haven't yet, I know a few of you, there's been a little chat about expanding minds. If you could put your name and program in the chat box, and also indicate if you've taken one or more practice tests and which one. For this one, if you could indicate if you've done the reading, the writing, and or the social studies, that would be wonderful. Great. Oh, it's so good to see. And we will remind you today how to get vouchers to take some official practice tests if you haven't yet, or you didn't know how to get the vouchers. Great. Good. So we have some people who've taken the social studies and the reading. Good, Ralu. Excellent. You're on mute, Brandy.
Do you want me to remind everyone real quick while they're putting their answers up?
Yep, I think we'll just remind people multiple times.
Perfect. So there are two different ways. We have sent out vouchers to a target group, which was individuals we were hoping to fill out a feedback form and let us know what their thoughts were on specific sections of the HiSET. So I have those vouchers. And if you're wanting to get your hands on one or two immediately, you can always reach out to me specifically, and I can get you a voucher or two, along with the feedback form for you to complete, which really helps us collect all that information. The second option is that we have given your consortium managers the opportunity to create an Essential Ed account and be able to distribute multiple vouchers to everyone and their staff, whether it be one specific site or all their sites. So if you can reach out to your consortium manager and find out if they have already signed up for an account, or if they have a designated person per site, they will have information through Essential Ed. And then once they create their account, they can distribute all of the vouchers to staff. And we're encouraging them to distribute 5 vouchers per staff. So that way you can get your hands on all of the subtests. And of course, they can always email me for more information on that too.
Thank you, Brandy. Yes, we want people to take those official practice tests today, much like last Wednesday with the science and the math. I'm going to be presenting kind of some trends that we're seeing from feedback from colleagues around the state, but many of you who are here have also taken some of these practice tests. So of course, we definitely want you to also be ready to share your own impressions so that we can learn from each other, because it's important that we kind of get our heads around things. So this is from Wednesday, but some of you may be new, but we want to talk a little bit about some points to consider. Impressions are based on one official practice test in an area. Not everyone took the same practice test. I know that when we talk about the writing test, Lindsay may talk about how she took a second writing test and, a second math test. And so it was a different math test. So she can now understand why some people are saying there was too much algebra on one test and maybe not enough on the other test. So our impressions are just based on very little right now, but be cautious about eyeballing the complexity of text. So there's a lot of different factors that make text complex. Text that may look easy to our eyes may actually be very difficult depending on the level of prior knowledge and other factors. There again, a text can look very, very difficult, but the questions being asked about it may not be as complex. Or if a student comes in or you've taught a lot of background knowledge on a particular topic, or the student has some strong vocabulary, what may look difficult may actually not be so difficult for a student. There are pros and cons to both the GED and the HiSET. The point isn't to pick one test for Minnesota. Both are going to be options now. But what is key is becoming familiar with the tests so that we can provide students options. One test may be a better fit for a student. And so we want to learn the HiSET so that we know how to make recommendations. And we've done this. We've done it with CASAS, just not so long ago, moving into CASAS goals, reading and math, TABE. I remember when I started, it was TABE 7-8. I know some of you remember that. Then it was 9-10. Now we're on 11-12. The GED has changed multiple times as well. So we just keep trucking through. Professional development will be provided. We already have it coming at the North and South regionals, and coming up, we will talk about some of those opportunities. And finally, we're going to do what we always do. We always come through. We support our learners. They come in with their goals and we figure it out, and we collaborate, and we practice, and we learn the math we need to learn. And we may, relearn some of the grammar that we've forgotten, the grammar rules. We do what it takes, and we will continue to do so. So today's agenda, very little about the basic test info and content. Brandy's going to talk a little bit about the pilot and the rollout. Then we're going to dig into some trends from comments made about the social studies, the reading test and the writing test, both the language and the essay. We're going to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about some things that it sounds like maybe we're going to have to add or strengthen, or some things that we can keep moving forward with that we're already doing, and then wrap up. Please use the chat box if you have questions. Brandy is standing by, and she will answer questions in the chat box. Lindsay and Astrid are also there as well, keeping an eye on things. Basic test info. So we talked about this before, but some of you I know are new to the HiSET, these debriefing webinars. So the biggest difference we can see visually here is that there are 5 HiSET tests as opposed to 4 GED tests. The writing and the reading have been separated again, like previous versions of the GED test. What we're going to be really focused on today is the language arts reading, the writing, and the social studies. So you can see that the HiSET has more questions and about the same amount of time, and in some cases less time. But one of the things we're going to talk about is there seems to be fewer passages for students to read on these tests, and more questions per passage, which may be why students are answering multiple questions on a longer passage, and can maybe get to know that passage. About the way the timing works on the language arts writing test for HiSET and the GED reasoning through language arts. There's a little tricky there. We're going to talk about that, something we're going to need to help students navigate. I'm going to turn my video off. Apparently I'm sounding garbled. Hopefully this sounds better, or else Lindsay's going to take over. Question types. The GED, for those of us very familiar with the GED, lots of different ways to answer questions, whether it's fill in the blank or the drop down, dragging and dropping, some short answers. The HiSET is multiple choice and extended response. Those are the 2 question types. So we're back to multiple choice, and with the exception of the essay. So it's a little more traditional in that way. A little bit about a content comparison. So just glancing over, you can see that history is increased, but the history on the HiSET also includes world history, not only US history. The civics and government, there's less, even though there were comments from people that there seemed to be more. Economics is about the same, and there's less geography. So immediately, as I've always done with the GED, I've looked and I thought, okay, so where am I gonna, get the most bang for my buck, right? We're gonna dive deep into civics and government, and and really look at some of that history, and maybe not so much geography, although geography is a very, very important skill. Depends on the time. HiSET. I thought this was interesting because there's a very big push for informational text in the college and career readiness standards, which the HiSET and GED are both incorporate. There's a little drop in informational text, and there's a little increase in literary texts. And I think that some of that may be that I know that not everybody's happy about this, but poetry is back. We'll talk a little bit about that with the reading. So that will definitely be a change again, that there are poetry selections on the HiSET, whereas GED kind of left them behind with the 2014 test. Writing. So I split this up a little bit. And I did look up what language facility meant. You may know I wasn't 100% sure what language facility meant. So there is, there's quite a bit, 43% having to do with sentence structure, word choice, precision, those style and tone, the nuances in vocabulary and idioms. So there's a lot of language there. Organization isn't too much different. Writing conventions. Now, the writing conventions would make up a lot of the usage and mechanics from the old GED. So, but the fragments and run-ons, which normally some of us think of as sentence structure issues, are now considered writing convention issues on the HiSET. So this is a little bit of a breakdown there. And we will get a little bit more into the essay when we talk about content. So again, pause for a moment. You certainly can put questions in the chat box. And I'd like to invite Brandy to talk a little bit about the pilot and rollout.
Next slide, please. So the goal for October is that we are going to be opening the pilot with around 10 to 12 test sites that are going to be giving the HiSET test to ABE learners in the area. Paper testing is going to be available. It is a limit or requirements that have to be met. So it's not a completely open, flexible paper policy. It's still being worked on, but we will have that option out there. Subsidy is going to be available just like the GED subsidy. It's going to be $8 per sub test, which is a total of $40, just like the GED. And then all other testing sites, our goal is to be joining us in January once we have all the information collected and the pros and cons and best practices from the pilot. Next slide, please. Scoring information. So we wanted to put this out there. We don't want to go too in depth, but just make sure everybody understands it. You have to have a minimum of 8 per subtest out of 20 to pass that section, but a total of 45 out of 100 to pass the entire battery. So again, yes, 8 times 5 is 40. You need 45. So it's almost like the old GED where you can borrow extra points from other areas. The biggest difference is that the essay has to have a minimum of a 2 out of 6 to pass. So you could essentially have a 15 on your writing test, but your essay is only a 1 and you fail that writing portion of the subtest. So that's something different that we're looking towards versus the GED. And I believe that's just a very basic breakdown of it. Again, we're not going to go too far into it, but we wanted to put that out there for everyone.
I'm going to pause and ask, well, we have Brandy here. There are some questions that she may say, that would be a great one to email me, but there are some she certainly could answer now. If you have any particular questions about anything that she's just talked about the pilot, about some of the scoring, what she said about the essay, any questions? I'm looking back at the subsidy. Any questions?
The pilot site's being chosen. Thank you, Britt. So earlier, when I first arrived in Minnesota, we actually put out some correspondence to all of the test sites specifically and let them sign up on their own. So this wasn't a delegated decision. This was a choice by the test center and their administrators on if they wanted to. We are going to have some corrections included in the pilot, which is going to be really valuable information. So far we have around 6 confirmed moving through the process, but again, we're still working on it as the company switches from ETS to PSI. And so as we're waiting for all of their data to switch over virtually and the rollout for them, that's when we'll be able to start our testing centers, if that helps. You're welcome, Britt. Thank you. Any other questions? And of course, I put my email out there, so you can always email me specific questions if you need to.
Is anyone currently here today? Are you aware if you are piloting the test at your site?
Yeah, and they may not have put any communication out yet because they're still working on the contract pieces of that.
Well, as we keep going, again, please put your questions in the chat box. We will answer as much as we can. One of us, hopefully, will be able to answer, but I do encourage you. Brandy has been very responsive to questions, as I have had many of them. So, for people who've already taken the official practice tests, Brandy also created a Google form where we could go in and add feedback about the practice tests or tests that we've taken. I do want to thank several of you who are on this webinar. You took the practice test, you may have gotten your vouchers or used them after last week's science and math webinar. And I noticed several more people posted feedback. Thank you so much for doing that and for taking those practice tests and just following up. And that feedback is very valuable, as is the feedback and the questions today. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing. And when I say trends, it means that these are points that are being brought up multiple times in the feedback. And I have also taken some of the tests. Lindsay has, Brandy has. So we just are combining everything that we know so far. So a little bit about what we're seeing about the content. Now, several people said they're seeing more civics, US history, and economics. And looking back at the percentages, I do believe that's 90% of the test is civics, US history, and economics, a little world history in there as well. Still lots of visual text and interpretation of data. That has not changed. I thought this was an interesting comment, but I think this was important, that the content remains very Eurocentric, particularly with history. And that is both the GED and the HiSET. Several people actually mentioned that, and I thought that was interesting, and that I wanted to include that information. General observations that were trends: more prior knowledge required. And this came out also for the science test, that we tend to think sometimes of the GED social studies and science test as not so bad if students have strong reading skills, but several people commented that in order to answer the questions, they had to have prior knowledge about different content areas. Many questions for one passage. Now, the plus that some people noted in the feedback is it allows for close reading and analysis. And instead of moving from short passage to short passage, students can work and go a little deeper with one passage. People said it was easier to navigate. I thought this was a wonderful comment that students overall, in this teacher's opinion, needed a broad content overview of social studies and practice with essential reading skills for the higher level questions. And a lot of still those. In fact, the social studies, I think, as far as the percentages, got the highest percentage for being quite a critical thinking test, as far as the questions, the inferencing, the synthesis, the evaluation, analysis question. But it is comparable in many ways. Several people said the timer is not obvious, so students have to know to watch it, and that it was rather jarring when the test ended, the practice test ended. So we want to keep an eye on that. I am going to give people a chance in just a moment to please chime in. We're also going to do the reading, and then we'll take a moment to chime in. So poetry is back, as I said, and so that will make some people really happy, and it will make some people maybe not so happy. There's still fiction and nonfiction texts. That has not changed. Students still have opportunities to compare texts. Something that there, again, a similar observation, many questions for one passage. There could be 9 or 10 questions for one passage rather than, 2, 3, or 4. I loved this comment. This teacher felt that we need to teach more scanning skills and text feature skills, or how to use text feature skills to quickly find information with the informational text. There's scrolling instead of clicking on the tabs. The reading skills overall on the reading test seemed very similar, but a lot of inferencing questions. That was pointed out multiple times. And several people commented that they like the idea that the reading and the writing tests are now separate, both because it's the putting both together is a very long test for our students, but also that they're very different skills. And some people suggested that they should be separate tests. Again, it's going to depend on which test seems like a better fit for your students. I do want to point out that hands down, according to feedback, people express that this test of all of the HiSET tests is the most similar to the GED. So that was kind of nice to read, because we've heard there are some differences in math. There's background knowledge needed on science and social studies. The writing has some different features, but many of our colleagues said this seemed the most similar to the GED test. And with that, I would like to invite, you can raise your hand, you can unmute. There aren't so many of us that we can't do that. Those of you who are on this webinar, I know that many of you left feedback. And if you'd like to say anything more about your impressions about the social studies or the reading tests that you took. And I'm going to count on Lindsay and Astrid to keep an eye on the raised hands. Lindsay, 20 of 30 questions were about the same 2 passages. Okay, and some of you may have had this experience. Laura did as well. So students had to read 2 passages, and then they had questions about comparing the 2. And what did you think, Laura, Brandy, or Lindsay? Did you think that that was a benefit to have so many questions, or to have students being able to compare two passages that they already kind of did a deep dive in? What did you think of that?
I thought the one passage, and I can't remember what it was because I don't have my notes with me, but it was good. But the other one I had to do, it's kind of got lost because like, well, they really didn't say it this way. They were just expressing their thoughts instead of statistics and points. But I'm just thinking it gave the student a chance to, or even I was pretending I was a student going back through pretending I didn't know anything or very much. But going back through and just looking and just not even have to read it all, but just say, oh, here's what I'm looking for. So skimming and scanning and trying to find, okay, here's the paragraph. And it kind of kept in the same order. So they didn't have to jump around. So that was helpful. So as long as I have those skills, they should do pretty well.
Good, thank you. Great impressions. I see, Susan, I think that's a really good point. You know, for every student that we have that perhaps really wants to keep an eye on that timer can be very distracting as well, where they're focusing so much. So thank you for kind of bringing that that other perspective of the timer, but it is good to know and good to let our students know. Brandy, more time to deep dive. Oh, that's a benefit there, according to what you're saying here, that maybe as you dive deeper, you may go back and realize previous answers need to be fixed. So going back and changing answers. Okay, great, thank you. Anyone have anything as specific as far as the social studies test?
The social studies, for me, it's Brandy. I found a lot of prior knowledge, and it wasn't just, and it was also vocabulary, because with the vocabulary, you could then infer what you were trying to look for. So for example, I had the one on James Madison, and there was the word Federalist. And if your student doesn't know what that is, then they're not going to even be remotely close to finding the answer unless it's just a lucky guess.
Thank you, Brandy, for that. Britt, thank you. That this is a great impression, that in general, there continues to be enough of a difference to explore how, that there can actually be a beneficial option for students. They're different enough. Still don't feel the HiSET is a great indicator of college readiness, but neither is the GED or a high school diploma. So thanks for adding that. In general, whether it's right or wrong, I've always been very honest with my students. When they ask me with the GED, for example, they say, well, if I pass the GED, does that mean I'm ready for college? I say not necessarily. There's a lot of pieces to that, right? Especially the GED test, where writing is not necessarily, the writing essay part is not necessarily a very strong part of the test, and writing is crucial in a lot of different areas and a lot of different degree pathways and trades. But you're feeling that there's enough difference, but it's not necessarily like, wow, this HiSET is going to be all the answer. I see some questions here. Could you use context clues for the vocabulary? Could somebody answer that? Not always.
Yeah, I really wasn't able to use the passages at a quick scan to be able to answer. It was more of like completely taking the information in the passage, make sure you're reading it and comprehending it to find the answers.
I think that's a great question, because you know what we learn and what we talk about so much of the time is that academic vocabulary doesn't have a lot of context often in authentic text, whereas more like content specific vocabulary is more often defined. If we want to use context clues for that content area vocabulary, but students are weak in the academic vocabulary, they're going to have trouble using context, period, because they're not going to understand enough of the words in the passage or around a particular word to use context as a clue. So that's interesting.
Christine Lee would like to share.
Please, Lee.
Yeah, since our meeting of last week, I thought a lot about this previous learning, previous knowledge, whatever. And I started thinking about the GED test in general and the HiSET test in general, and how long we have to spend with students. At some point, how long would a test have to be to truly get an accurate assessment of how well how many questions, if you we're testing for all that knowledge, how long would the test have to be to check for 4 years of high school social studies testing? So how do you begin to design a test about that? You'd have to rely on some, if not a lot, of previous learning to have the test be valid at some level. So how does HiSET help us to identify what previous learning they're missing and what we have to help the students learn to enter into the test more readily prepared? I don't know. I think that's what makes, I've been thinking a lot about it. I don't know if I articulated that succinctly in this amount of time, but that's kind of where I'm at with it all right now.
That's a great question, and these are high school equivalency tests, but what are we measuring? What equivalency are we measuring, right? Is it content, or is it, the type of transferable literacy and numeracy skills that students need? I'm not sure if anyone would like to chime in. I would love it if you would chime in.
Not exactly a conversation starter at a party, but anyway.
No, Lee, but I appreciate that you're doing some really big thinking about this. And it is a really, really good question. And I see Brandy saying, is one practice test enough? That question came up last week, of course. If we're seeing differences in the practice test forms, what does that mean about, one practice test measuring students' ability? I remember from the GED 2002, we had the different forms of the GED paper practice tests. And I remember that, for example, for the language arts writing, some of the forms had very little sentence combining or revision on them. Most of them were grammar type, grammar usage and mechanics questions, while other ones, had a lot of those sentence revision, sentence combining questions. Susan, you're commenting that you need HiSET to narrow down some content. I'm wondering, Susan, I know that you do a lot of, you do work with science, but social studies, I think, is your background. Are you seeing anything as far as the HiSET and the GED with social studies, for example, where you feel that HiSET may be the practice test may be a better indicator of what content students are missing?
Yes. I mean, I don't teach, I haven't taught GED social studies, but I've taken a ready test, and I thought I had to do more critical thinking on the GED ready test, and on the HiSET test, it was easy for me only because I taught it for 34 years. But if I was doing that version for science, which I tried, it would be more challenging if I did not know which parts, the comment about 4 years of high school content being eligible to have context knowledge about makes it seem impossible to me.
Okay.
Without more guidance.
Thank you so much for talking with us here. I really appreciate that. Students need, Laura, to take more than one practice test. Yeah, I mean, this is something that's starting to come out as a trend from us talking together. And I think that Lindsay, I am going to call on you here, because you may be one of the only one of us who took more than one practice test in an area.
Yeah, I took another math test over the weekend, and I think I got the version that some of you got. I could just hear Andy in the background being like, too much algebra. And I'm like, I think this is the test he got, because it was overwhelmingly algebra and very little else. So I don't think taking one practice test in an area is a good idea and then sending students off to test. I definitely think that the versions are different enough from the little I know that it's worth having students take multiple and seeing what content comes up, and then as indicating needing help and then focusing on that. But it seems that they're different enough. So, which it's helpful information. We just, and maybe good test practice, right? If students don't get too overwhelmed with taking multiple tests, but I think it would help in the long run to do that anyways. So
I would like to raise my hand again.
Please do, Lee.
That's all I got, man, unless I put my camera on. It almost sounds to me, and this is the capitalist in me, I guess. It almost sounds like a sales trick or tactic in order to have us spend more money on practice tests. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but Pearson VUE, you do a practice test, and whether you pass or don't pass it, you get feedback that shows you specific areas where to go get that information to further your skills in that area. Like I think I've said this before with Kaplan, Steckman, whatever. And so we get more direct. It seems like students get more direction as what they have, where they can go, where they can get it, and what they have to study to further their skills. With the HiSET, the feedback is you're short on analysis, you're short on inference, and those types of things, without any direction as to where or what and where to get resources to help that student. Does that make sense? It does to me.
I just put in the chat that what Lee said is correct. There is not a specific in the Kaplan book on page 72. You can practice algebra or you can practice government or civics. So that is a difference. It does give you feedback, but it doesn't give you, this is where you go to practice on it. Correct.
And I appreciate these very pointed questions, like Christie's in the chat box. You know, what are we going to see similar differences between versions of the actual test? And I really, before we leave today, we will have another reminder about those deep dive webinars coming up with HiSET directly. And that will be the time to ask these questions and to ask these pointed questions. I know we've done it with GED in the past where people have gotten, have asked some pretty direct questions about how is the essay actually calculated, or what impact does the essay actually have on the GED writing test. And so I really invite as many of you as possible to attend at least one of those webinars and ask Adam directly to talk a little bit, Adam and Tanya, about this idea that we seem to be seeing about the practice test being different, and what does that mean about the forms. There is, Laura, you may have dreamt it. There is, as Brandy said, there is the diagnostic, but it doesn't go down into like specific resources. Ralu?
Yeah, I have a question. At the end of the test that I took, there was a page in which it showed prior years of how the ranges between the somewhat prepared, not prepared, prepared, well prepared. And I noticed that every year they increase that score, the lowest score. So they have, do the questions remain the same, or do they make it more difficult over the years? And do they use the same every year, do the same practice tests, or is it a algorithm that it's like picks out of a bunch of them, or I don't know, how do they pick which version?
Brandy, do you have any idea about that?
The version of the practice.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when a student, if you are the student, that's how we signed in, the administrator that gives you the voucher also allocates which versions of the practice tests are allotted that could populate out of random. So when I had spoken with one of the Essential Ed representatives, they had mentioned that when you create the account, you could go all the way up to or back to, I believe it was version 7, all the way up to 11. And so depending upon if you are in charge of the vouchers and you give them out to your students, you could go in there and only give them the option of version of 11, or you could give them the option of 10 and 11 to populate at random for them. So the dependent upon, Lindsay, when you took the second, did it tell you which version you were given, or did you get another version of 11?
No, I got a 10 and I got an 11 first and then a 10.
Perfect. So that's exactly what was pertained to me in direction. So you could go in essentially and your students could take 4 different versions between 7 through 11, if that helps answer.
I think I remember taking 11 on the writing test. I see Laura also remembers seeing the versions. I don't know. I'm wondering if some people need to do a deep dive and get a few more vouchers and maybe take multiple versions of a practice test to maybe be able to be a little more informative about maybe which one feels a little bit more balanced. But it's hard because we don't know. I mean, we don't know. I've never taken a HiSET, official test. And so I think we need to really catalog these questions to ask the HiSET people directly. Yeah, there are free online practice tests as well. Well, I'm going to move us on here to the writing so that we can talk a little bit about this and then maybe get into some conversation about what we saw here. Thank you again so much for your for both speaking when you can, not everyone has a microphone, and for chatting in the chat box. Again, this kind of information that we can share together is really helpful. I'm a strong believer that even though GED and HiSET definitely, they are trying to they try to teach us about their tests. As Lee brought up, from a capitalistic perspective, they are also marketing their products. And so that's one of the reasons we thought it was really important to get a chance for just colleagues to come together and speak honestly about what we saw, because certainly there is a marketing angle to the testing companies. So we'll talk a little bit about writing and language. Content, there was quite a bit of vocabulary focus. Now, I split language in the essay up here. So this first part is just the language. Context, questions where students do need to determine meanings from context, but also precision. And precision is a key part of the college and career readiness standards in the language standards. So, but I know that we're also seeing more of these questions on tests like CASA, SCOLS, and the TABE as well. So precise words and phrases. Knowledge of transitions. This seemed to be kind of a big thing as far as knowledge of transitions when reading the passages and answering the multiple choice questions. An understanding of unity and coherence in writing. So really understanding them as 2 of what we often call 4 bases of writing, as far as, and some of this, was in for GED questions where students are asked as far as, understanding that each paragraph should have a key idea or a topic sentence, and all the sentences should be relevant. Coherence, there's clear organization, details are related to each other with clear relationships, transition words are being used. And redundancy and wordiness. I know that the practice test I took had quite a few questions dealing with students recognizing redundant language or wordy language, which can be, in my opinion, with my students, fairly complex questions. Some overall observations: they're still editing sentences for grammar, usage, and mechanics, sentence structure. They're reading a passage and the questions are coming out of the passage. Several people said there seems to be a little heavier sentence and paragraph revision in the HiSET. Like the 2002 GED, there were several comments that people made that the language part of the GED writing test felt more like the 2002 GED as far as those revision questions and the sentence combining questions. More critical thinking in terms of explaining reasoning for writing choices. This is something I know Heather Anderson and I were having a conversation about this, and about not just the type of question where if adding or deleting a sentence, where that might go or where it should come out, but it wasn't just that. The actual question asked that the student give the reasoning for why the writer might make that choice. And that seemed to be a little bit higher level thinking. So again, really understanding the concepts of unity and coherence and support, adequate support. Many questions about one passage, and some people said the numbering of the paragraphs and the sentences was confusing. That actually came up quite a few times as far as the students being able to answer questions and how things are numbered. There is some uncertainty about spelling questions, and this is something that I'm going to ask directly to HiSET. I had a misspelled word question on my practice test, but it was affect and effect. So that was more of a homophone question. But they do mention spelling or misspellings in some of their prep materials. And I thought back to the GED that existed when I first started before the 2002 change, which actually required students to recognize misspelled words, not just homophones. I don't know if anyone else encountered, besides the effect and effect, any other spelling questions, but I'm very interested in that. And hold your thought a second when we talk about the essay, and then I invite you to share some of your impressions. The essay goals are different. And I really liked this, this kind of clarification. The HiSET seems to ask students to explain their position rather than what the GED asks, which is to determine which is the stronger argument and why. The topics that several of us found could not easily be yes or no. And that made it trickier. I know that the prompt that I had, I started, going in one direction where I, agreed, or I thought I had a position, but I kept thinking, wow, there's so many exceptions to this. So that to me felt a little challenging. And we've talked a lot about opinion being part of the writing, and it is very clearly requested that students share their opinion and experience. But there is also instructions to refer back to the readings as well. So an opinion alone isn't sufficient. I think that balance to me feels like it could be challenging for students. There is an emphasis on opinion and experience in addition to evidence from the text, but unlike the GED essay test, which we really teach, no opinion, everything needs to be supported from evidence in one of the two texts. The fact that there is an emphasis, and it is part of the instructions to include opinion and experience. But within that, then I think, and some other people mentioned, the understanding of organizing a logical argument, even in sharing an opinion, presenting that opinion or your experience, to logically support a position that you're taking is important. It is human scored. This is a big difference from the GED. So when the GED changed in 2014, of course, computers score the essays, but HiSET essays are scored by humans very similarly, where I think They have a few people score, and if there's too big of a difference, they'll bring in a third human scorer to kind of break the tie. Some people mentioned that there might be a temptation for students to summarize the texts rather than develop a well-developed position. And this, I think, is a really key point that we're going to have to inform our students. As we know on the GED test, there is a separation, right? There's the students do the multiple choice, there's a break, or they do the essay and then a break and then the multiple choice. I can't remember the sequence, but there is a break and they're given 45 minutes to do the essay. On the HiSET, they're allotted the time, and the student has to keep track of how to use the total time. So several people commented in the feedback that they have a concern that students might spend too much on one part or the other. And so that time management issue is something that students haven't had to deal with the GED. And I think that is that could be very tricky with students as far as making sure they leave themselves enough time to do the full test. Impressions, please. Any impressions about the writing, either the language questions or the essay from people who did it. I know that you're we've got, yep, Brandy, the GED reading writing. No spelling questions. There was a drop down. There was a drop down option, Brandy. I thought they said there weren't going to be any drop down options.
So one of the very last questions was one page with about 5 questions, and they were all drop down fill in the blanks of like which word fits best, which phrase works best for the grammar portion of my skills.
I wonder if they're testing, if they're doing any testing of new types of questions. That seems odd because we've heard multiple choice only.
Oh, no.
Oh.
This was GED. This was GED.
Oh, GED.
I took today.
Oh, yes, the drop down, one of many different types of questions or answer possibilities. Can you also comment, you purposely did not do the writing? That was on the GED, right?
Correct. I purposely didn't do the writing because I wanted to see what kind of score they would give me if I were to pass. And from conversations that I've heard, that a lot of students can skip the writing and the writing essay and still pass the reading writing portion of the
Well, keep in
GED.
mind that GED, the official practice test, they don't give you a score on the essay. Nobody looks at it.
Correct.
So
I had a well above likely to pass in the higher green, and I did not do the essay.
yeah, and that's why, I always remember having to kind of score it on my own for the official practice test and make sure that we could get it, what the student wrote, printed out. Of course, the HiSET, it is scored because I actually had to wait about 45 minutes. I submitted my score and then it said, kind of wait, whatever. And then I got an email about 45 minutes later with my essay score and some suggestions for improving my essay score. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and one thing that I noticed with the GED today was the first 8 questions were off the 2 same passages. So it didn't jump from like 2 or 3 questions and give me a new passage.
All right, good. Well, thanks for refreshing on those GED practice tests. Lindsay, you said the benefit of having unallotted time. Yes, thank you for the other side of that argument, that in fact, if you did get through the multiple choice quickly, you could have more than 45 minutes. So that's good too. But the time management issue or being aware of it is definitely something. And anyone else, would you like to raise your hand, comment about your impressions of the writing test? Yes, thank you. that GED is a predictive test format. Heather, you had problems with the timer on the test. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I started the reading, writing, and I only had 2 passages like Lindsay did, but I couldn't see the timer, so I didn't know exactly how much time left I had to write for my essay. So that did cause me a little bit of anxiety because that timer wasn't like right there, so I didn't know exactly how much time I had.
Mm.
So teaching your students, like, make sure you're looking at the timer and finding it.
Great, thank you. So we definitely have some things about the timers. Any other comments on, I can say that on the essay, I felt that the 2 texts to compare, honestly, were not overly well written. But again, these are practice tests, and practice tests are sometimes made up of items that didn't make the cut for the actual test. Oh, Christy, great question. Are you able to do the essay first and then go back to the multiple choice? I'm not sure. Did anyone try that? Or Brandy, do you know if you can do that? If you can start with whichever part you want to? I think that's another excellent question. We're saving these chat logs, and Astrid Leiden is here taking notes. So we are going to make sure that we get these questions posed and we get some answers. I didn't even think about that. The multiple choice started and I just went with it. So, so I wasn't thinking about that. I think that this is an area that is going to, if HiSET is offered as an option, that is going to be a change. Writing in general, this is general and this is countrywide, is one of the literacy skills that's taught less often than vocabulary, than reading, grammar, speaking and listening. And so I know there are some teachers who are going to say, well, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and have been teaching writing. And some are going to say, okay, so I'm going to need to learn how to integrate more writing into my instruction. And I think, this could be an area that, could be a change, just like other areas we're seeing as far as, teaching more science content, teaching more social studies content. But depending on how much writing that you teach normally or integrate into your instruction. Any other comments? You want to say a little bit more, Christy? Can you unmute?
I knew you were going to say that.
I know. Well, that's what happens.
I just felt like I was really impressed by having them separate, because reading and the writing are such separate skills. So I really liked that there were 2 focused tests. And I felt that it really gave, it was just higher quality. Like, it really focused in on those writing skills that we need, that the GED maybe doesn't focus in on as much. But like you were just saying, with writing not being taught as much, my concern is that people knowing that there's this writing part, it's going to turn people off from the HiSET test.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's tough because many of you know that I have been a writing teacher actually longer than I've been a reading teacher. And one of the things that we know that's pretty clear is that writing is an essential skill, and it isn't just an essential skill to write essays. Writing is an essential skill to organize thinking, for language development. There's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of jobs all kinds of jobs that require some kinds of writing. And it might be writing an email, it might be writing an agenda, it might be writing an incident report. So, I'm not sure. It's tough when time seems to be limited. It's harder. Writing is like math, right? It takes a long time, which reading does as well. I think there's an interesting question here. As did you find the essay to be what you thought? I had shared with Brandy and Lindsay that I decided to try the essay and try to see using tricks. So I made sure to have a very clearly stated position. I had 5 paragraphs. I used very strong transitions throughout. I made sure to include some evidence from the text and word it, fairly closely so that it was obvious that I was referring back to the text, and I got a very good score. I don't know what my evidence shows, but I did try to kind of play a little bit. I didn't feel that my essay had necessarily a lot of substance, but it certainly had a lot of the markers. Christy, you didn't complete the essay. Would you say a little more? What did you get? What was your score?
I was just trying to remember what I got. I know I got feedback that it wasn't a good essay, that it needed to be completed. I don't remember if they gave me a flat out 0 or if I actually got 1 point. I'm gonna see if I have the email. But yeah, I purposely didn't do it because I wanted to see what they would say. I'm gonna search my email.
Okay, so of course, if you got a 0 or a 1, that would be a problem. Then you would not have passed. Well, that's the official practice test. Heather, you got a 2 or a 3. And remember, what we get as scores is not an indication of whether or not we know what we're doing or teaching. I did not get a perfect score on the essay. I wrote it in about 20 minutes and I got a 5 out of a 6. So Lindsay, I know I'm sorry, Lindsay, I got to give you all the props. What did you get? Yeah. She said she was shocked. 0, blank, or off topic. So this is more information than we get from the GED practice tests. I love that, to improve your score. How about write something? No, that's great. Thank you for copying that and pasting that. And what's interesting to me is I always think back to some heated conversations I had with the GED testing service about the 2002 GED, when I said, wow, I mean, some of what you're saying in the scoring session, I wouldn't pass. Like, I wouldn't pass. And the GED trainer said to me these exact words: look, your idea and other writing teachers' ideas of what good writing is are probably better than ours at GED. But what counts is what we at GED think is good writing. And I thought, whoa, that was a very honest question. And it goes back to, again, to what, yeah, it was a wow. I mean, I appreciated the honesty of that answer, but it did get me thinking a little bit differently, and it made me think of something that Heather and I talked about, where Heather said, one of the things we'll have to work with students is the aesthetic of the test is different. The wording of the questions, that's different. And that will take some work. I mean, every test kind of has its own language, its own way of doing things. And the creators have some of their own ways of thinking what's, effective. So Brandy, transitions, conjunction words, define your argument, introduce topic, clear and conclusion statement. Anything else?
That's where I'm wondering, with all of your tricks of the trade, if you were able to do all that and get your score versus actual substance.
I mean, it wasn't a terrible essay. I mean, I did offer a position, but I kind of waffled back and forth because it was a complex topic to offer a position on, because it was very kind of nuanced. The topic, not the text that we're given, but the topic could be very nuanced.
Does it give you one, or does it specifically, or to choose from?
One what?
Topic.
Oh, it was just one topic. It was just one topic and the 2 points of view. But it certainly wasn't, wow, I could really go down this road with it, because as soon as I started down one side, I went, wow, but in reality, this really could go both ways. And I think I think there are perhaps different challenges on the essay for the HiSET than on the GED. Not necessarily, I can't go out right now and say harder or better, but different. And again, the purpose is different. Explain your position or take a position and explain using opinion, experience, and evidence from the text, as opposed to writing an analysis of which is the stronger argument and why. Those are some different purposes. Any other comments? So I'm wondering here, and I'm going to ask Brandy and Astrid and Lindsay as my my colleagues. Do we have time? We think maybe 10 minutes to jump into groups, or should we continue having a discussion with some things that we think potentially we may need to think about moving forward with social studies, reading and writing instruction?
I would say we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think we could do 10
Maybe.
minutes in groups.
Excellent.
And maybe encourage people just to tackle one of the tests. The writing, reading, or social studies. We probably won't have time to talk about all three.
All right, thank you, team. I appreciate your your input. Lindsay, you did such a beautiful job explaining how to do this on Wednesday. Would you explain this one again?
Yes, no problem. So I am just grabbing it. Okay, I will share my, oh no, I won't share my screen. Just kidding. Can I do that? Is that okay?
You should be able to.
Okay, we're gonna get into groups, and you are going to, some of you were here at the last one, so it's going to be the same instructions, but you are going to see this document. We'll put this in the chat in just a moment. And you're going to think about 3 questions. What about our instruction will remain the same? What might have to change? And then what questions do we have about HiSET content that we want to make sure get recorded? And again, we don't know everything. So this is kind of like what we know now. How could we answer these questions with the knowledge that we have? But obviously after the deep dive webinars and after we keep taking practice tests, and maybe some of our students will start taking them, then we'll know more and be able to adjust. But if we could have a record of this, that would be amazing, to make sure that these questions get answered from HiSET. So your group number will be in the top left of your screen once you are put in breakout groups, and then you can use this document to navigate. You don't have to scroll. If you're in group 6, you can click group 6 and go down. Part of this has already been filled in because we are keeping everything in the same document. So math and science, they already have notes. That's from last week. You can go to the September 19th section in purple, and for time's sake, you could focus on one of these. Like Astrid suggested, or you can work on all 3, but answering those questions for writing, reading, and social studies. Yeah, so I see people are already in the document. Did I miss anything? Any questions?
Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Okay.
And then come back for sure, because we're going to talk a little bit about some upcoming cool PD.
So everyone has
You're on mute, Christine.
I was on mute and I just said, welcome back. I hope you had some good conversations. I hope that that you were able to, potentially add some questions that we can ask, or if some of you know that I can corner one of the HiSET people and get information that will then turn into a newsletter article. We just have a couple minutes here before I want to quickly review some of the upcoming opportunities. Any key ideas that came out, any key question or something, an aha moment that anyone would like to share?
Well, our group talked a lot about like the test taking strategies.
Mhm.
It's something we'll be teaching, the difference between, taking like multiple choice and how to deliberate. Most of this, we're going to keep our content, the way we're teaching things, the same, because it's very similar with the content. But a couple of them were saying that they use the ReadWorks, and it's really been helpful as far as helping them to be able to read the type of material that's needed. So they suggested, focusing more on like ReadWorks practice. I'd say the same thing with informational literacy practice. So more content.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear that you're feeling that maybe that in your group, not so much is going to change about content. I mean, it's kind of hard to answer that question. It really depends on what your instruction is like and what you've had time to cover, and whether or not some people are saying, oh, my instruction, for me, I look and I go, oh, my writing instruction isn't really going to change because I have everybody together, or I had everybody together. I had GED students. I had, high school credit recovery students. I had college prep students all in the same, class. And so, but and that always didn't work. But, it's really going to be individual as well. But it's good to hear that, there are things that we're all doing that we're going to be able to keep. Any other thoughts? It's Monday. Go ahead, Heather.
So, Christine, so in our group, we were talking about the Kaplan books for the GED practice. And you know how the Kaplan will say, okay, we're going to be working on inferences for this lesson. And in the next lesson, we're going to just be working on main idea. But instead of like picking one skill, that you would have to do more of a close reading for each of those passages, instead of just picking the one skill. So kind of tweak it a little bit so that you're teaching how to do a close reading, and still, we're really talking about inferences, but really close reading that passage.
Right. Yeah, and still using passages, tweaking the activities a little bit, but still using the passages from your Kaplan books, from your Kaplan GED books. Absolutely. Anybody else? Thank you, Heather. Yeah, it's like, I always say now, I've been in education long enough to have been through multiple initiatives. So whether, standards, multiple sets of standards, and, different ideas of what evidence-based reading is, different, best practices for writing, and different tests and things. And I know that I have the, sometimes I'll swing over one way and I'll go, oh gosh, there's a lot I'm going to have to change. And there usually are some things I have to change, but I'm usually also doing things that, the pendulum swings back to the middle, and I go, actually I may use my materials a little differently, but there's still lots that I'm doing that I can keep. And so I really encourage you to to also, really identify the things that you're doing, that, the test taking skills and, and those skills for inferencing and finding a main idea and details and determining vocabulary from context and using text features. And those are still extremely valuable moving forward. Well, I want to keep us on time. Thank you. I look forward to reading the document. Lindsay as well, Brandy, Astrid. We're meeting, the Language and Literacy Advisory Team is meeting tomorrow. And, this is on our agenda. We've got a lot of people from around the state. Like what are our next steps? What do we think we need to do? I know that the A team, the Numeracy State Advisory Team, is going to be thinking about this as well. And Atlas, of course, will be thinking about it. A couple things I want to highlight here. We do have these deep dive webinars, and these will be hosted by HiSET. So I'm not doing them. Atlas isn't doing them. These will be hosted by HiSET. There's one on reading comprehension across the subtests, so that will deal with social studies, science, and the reading test. There will be one whole session on writing fluency, and the final session on Halloween will be focusing on mathematics and some educator and test taker. I didn't fix that typo from Wednesday, resources. Fall regionals are coming up, and I'm really, really excited to say that South Regional, Heather Anderson and I will be doing a session where we are going to be talking about the HiSET writing test, giving participants an opportunity to do some practice questions and look at some essay prompts and maybe identify some 4 or 5 key areas to focus on moving forward in instruction for writing. Christy Nielsen and I will be doing that up north for North Regional. So I'm excited about that. We're also, Brandy and I and Lindsay and I are going to do some roundtables about some more HiSET debriefing. Language and Literacy Institute, we're going to be talking about it tomorrow. We've heard a lot from a lot of people, just in general, high school equivalency preparation, diploma preparation, that is on our minds. So you can look for that coming up as well. And the registration opens tomorrow, and you can find all these things on the Atlas website. And Brandy, do you want to make your final plug?
Yes, thank you. So again, if you are wanting to get vouchers for all of your staff at your site, just being able to take a look at it, you can always reach out to your consortium manager and see if they've already set up an account or if they've designated an individual for each site specifically. And if they haven't, you can always reach out to me and I can get the information to Essential Ed and we can get you an account set up. It's fairly easy. The directions are explained in the email when they send it to you, and kind of how you did this, preparing the account and setting up the voucher. And then they'll teach you how to designate those. We are going to have vouchers for students too. So we wanted to be able to get these vouchers into the hands of staff of ABE first, and then we will have vouchers to pass out to programs for their students as well, especially for the pilot, because we're going to want to have students have access to those vouchers. So thanks so much.
And thank you everybody for joining us as we're getting our feet wet. Thank you so much for sharing your impressions, because I just have tremendous respect for the insights of my colleagues, your experience, just content knowledge and your experience with our student population. And I really appreciate you sharing with us. Email Brandy with any questions, logistical questions, voucher questions. You can always email me or Lindsay. If we don't know the answer, we will find someone who knows the answer. And just really appreciate you joining us here. Thank you. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much to Christine and Brandy for facilitating this webinar.
I'm interested to hear, Laura, about the paper versions and what you find out.
I'll have Lee take a bunch of them just to see.
Thank you. Please share then.
I will. I'll keep him busy with that.